Good evening, everybody, and welcome once again to the Lepanto Institute's Anchor Team. I'm your host, Michael Hitchborn, and tonight we have a very special guest who I will be bringing on in just a moment. But before we do, I want to kind of give you a rundown on some of the things that are going on here at the Lepanto Institute. One thing is, next week is the annual assembly. It's everybody's favorite time of year. The annual assembly of the Association of United States Catholic Priests. That's right. The heretics are gathering in Baltimore, and they're having a great big gala with a bunch of their gay lovers. I mean, with a bunch of their fellow priests. So that's going to be taking place. We've got a big report coming out on them on Monday that we just put together. We're going to do a series of reports on them throughout the course of the week, and then later on, we'll be doing some additional reports on them as we learn new things. In the meantime, also next week, I am going to be going to Beloit, Wisconsin, because next Thursday and Friday, I'm going to be giving a presentation at the big annual or first anniversary of the Coalition of Canceled Priests. A lot of my friends are going to be there. Father Altman's going to be there. Father Peter or Dr. Peter Kwasniewski is going to be there. A whole bunch of people. I think my friend Jesse Romero is going to be there. So it's going to be a great event. I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be a good time. And one last thing, we are still working on CCHD and a few other investigations. Can't really talk about it, but the CCHD investigation's coming right along. It's a slog. It's just so much. It's just so long. In any event, that's where we are, and I'm going to bring in our guest right now so that we can get our prayer done. Our guest this evening is Mr. Bug Hall. So happy to have him with us tonight. And why don't we go ahead and begin with our Ave. In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum. Benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus.
Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen.
Our Lady of Victory.
Ora pro nobis.
In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. I need to learn how to say Our Lady of Victory in Latin.
Yeah.
I can't think of that one right off. But Bug, I'm so glad you're here with us tonight. It's always a pleasure to have you on. And I think we've just got so much to talk about. There's so many different things going on in the world right now. I mean, craziness going on in the Vatican, craziness going on in Washington, D.C., craziness going on in the world economic stage. It seems so much like I don't know. I can't really put a finger on how to analogize it, but it seems to me like this giant conflagration is starting to erupt. It's bubbling from the surface and it's getting ready to explode in our faces.
Yeah.
Am I reading this wrong?
No. I think we're certainly in a general phase of crisis, right? I mean, it's a world crisis, and it's hitting on every front. I mean, it's hitting on, we were speaking briefly about economics. It's hitting from the economic front to the spiritual front, socially. I mean, it's really hitting in the church and out of the church. The Carthusians have a saying, the world turns, but the cross is steady. And that's always true. But the world is turning a lot faster right now than it usually does.
I think so. I really do. One of the things we're going to talk about this evening is the pending and ever elusive Dobbs v. Jackson decision. It seems like every week we're sitting on pins and needles going, okay, are they going to release this thing, or are we going to get another week of threats of violence and threats of vandalism against churches and threats against the Supreme Court justices themselves? What do you think? Why do you think they're delaying it? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I have some thoughts on it. They're nebulous, but I mean, it could be anything from internal conflict, right, to more utility-minded motives, right? What can we bring out of this time frame? What politically how can we make this pending decision stretch and be used for us, right? Fundraising, I'm sure, is a huge part of it. I can imagine there's quite a few people that are close to this thing that are fundraising like crazy on the back of the looming potential decision.
Right. It seems to me though that the one who makes the decision, I don't know if it's a joint decision of the Supreme Court justices as to when they release something, or if it's something that's determined by the Chief Justice. I don't know exactly how that decision is made. Do you know?
Nobody does. That's
Yeah.
the internal mechanisms of how that precisely functions has always been pretty nebulous. They'll release these sort of tentative schedules for June, right? Of, sort of what types of decisions are being released at various times. But that's always a case-by-case basis from year to year. And nobody really knows precisely how the internal decisions are made there. So it's a wait and see. My only thing is I can't quite stand to be heartbroken. You know what I mean?
Mm.
I have really, we all have really prayed for this for so long. And even though this isn't the fix that most people think it is, as far as it being kicked back to the states, it certainly is a huge victory. And I'm trying to not think about it until that day comes when it's finally released.
Yeah, I hear you.
Part of it that is probably, all of the anti pro-choice stuff, right? I think there's a big part of it that is intentionally allowing that stuff to be stoked and be, ferment, if you will, further. Now, to what end, I don't know if it's just hard to say.
Yeah, you were talking about how nobody seems to know how it works. The only thought that came to my mind was, wow, so much for government transparency, right?
Yeah, that's the big thing is, we purport to be a democratic system, one of the various democratic type systems of government. But when it comes to the Supreme Court, it's a completely different type of system, right? Even though that's embedded within the democratic system, that branch operates completely outside of that scope. And there really has never been transparency when the court was wildly against good morals. There was never transparency. I've gone back. I'm too young to have lived it, but I've gone back and studied it quite a bit. And that side of the aisle was just as on pins and needles, always sort of wondering, how does this function? When is it going to be released? How do we get these answers? So here we are. But we've got enough good justices for this to easily happen. Right?
Yeah.
So much good could easily be happening right now. And it's just a matter of wait and see.
Yeah, and the only transparency we seem to have gotten has come from a leaker that went ahead and leaked Justice Alito's draft of the decision. It's kind of interesting to me. They promised that they were going to investigate the leaker and figure out who it was, and they were going to be drawn up and quartered. But there doesn't seem to have been anything done about it. We're not hearing about any investigations. We're not hearing about any pursuits of any suspects, and there's no proceeding. There's no hearing. There's no nothing that seems to indicate that justice is going to be done with regard to whoever illegally leaked this particular document. I mean, talk about a huge breach.
Yeah.
Unprecedented.
It is unprecedented. Manipulation of the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court's decisions in any form is, it's right up there at the highest levels of sort of our system's taboos, right? The way our system functions, you could almost call it sacrosanct, right? Like it's absolutely up there with the highest thing. So, it should have been bipartisan. It should have been a big deal. But because right now politics are so partisan, the divide is ever growing and ever widening. There was one side that was very much in favor of the leak. And I also think partially because they can utilize that to point to made up issues within the Supreme Court, right? The idea of expanding the court, the idea of altering how the court functions so that they have more control and so that conservative decision makers can have less control.
Unreal. So with regard to all of this and the way it's been playing out, of course, we mentioned that the pro-aborts are gearing up for violence. Jane's Revenge, or I think actually their name is Jane Sent Us.
Right.
Or no, maybe it is Jane's Revenge. And then what's
Their
the other one? Ruth
catchphrase
Sent Us.
is yeah, that's like their little motto.
Right.
Which is ironic because Jane
Roe.
Jane Roe, the woman who was the plaintiff for the case, she came out as pro-choice.
Pro-life.
I'm sorry, yeah, pro-life. She came out as pro-life, and so they're still using her name. They're still leaning on her reputation, so to speak, without any of the facts.
So Jane's Revenge says the month of mercy expired on June 13th. Pro-life organizations who closed their doors will be removed as targets. Otherwise, it's open season on them. I seem to remember a number of years ago, after George Tiller was assassinated in his Lutheran church, that pro-life organizations were put on watch lists, and that the FBI was actually, I was working for American Life League at the time. And I remember we found out that American Life League was on an FBI watch list, and that we were being scrutinized. In fact, American Life League at that time went through 3 IRS audits, which was just astronomically, incalculably not possible unless you were being targeted.
Right.
So you look at what Jane's Revenge says: the month of mercy has expired, and now they're going to have open season on pro-life organizations. It seems to me that this is real and true domestic terrorism, and that the justice system has an absolute obligation to crack down on domestic terrorists, but there doesn't seem to be anything done about this. Of course, it's selective in their approach to things, but what should we be doing about this?
Well, the nature of our system of government, there isn't really much we can be doing about it, right? All the alphabet organizations, the FBI, the CIA, NSA, they're all partisan organizations at this point, right? They don't operate for the common person. They operate for a particular political party. We've seen that with all the hearings that are going on right now with the January 6th thing, right? I mean, it's absolutely it's political, it's political assassination.
Right.
And they don't have any interest in anything that's a purported crime on the other side. That's the standard, and I think we just have to accept that that's what it is at this point. No amount of voting harder is going to fix that problem.
Right. Not only is voting harder not going to fix the problem, but it seems to me that this is no longer a matter that we should be turning to the federal government for answers for. This is something that we need to turn to local law enforcement and say, hey, this is why local elections are so important. We've got to make sure that we've got sheriffs in office that we know that we can trust, people who are truly of the community. Well, Democrat or Republican, at the point of the sheriff, if he is really about justice and he really is about what it means to be a law enforcement officer, then a good man, a man of goodwill, is one who is going to make sure that he's out there patrolling and making sure, preventing crime, but also investigating real accusations of crime that are about to be committed. So I think that really focusing on local elections and focusing on local law enforcement and getting to know your local law enforcement community and getting to know your police officers and saying, if you're a pro-life organization, you should be contacting the police on a regular basis if there's even a hint of a threat. Right. I think that Catholic parishes should be, asking a local law enforcement officer to come by and just patrol the parking lot from time to time to make sure that things are in order. Make sure you've got security cameras and that kind of stuff.
And Catholic men need to step up and just do whatever is necessary to protect the organizations that we believe in, to protect our parishes, to protect our, we saw this back when the whole statue debacle was taking place, right? Back when the ripping down every Catholic statue in the country. There were little enclaves of Catholics who said, we're not going to stand for that. And they surrounded their local statues of saints, and they protected them. In some cases, they protected them for a month and a half, with a rotating duty of watch, and that worked, right? Those statues remain today, and many others do not. So
I don't know if you got a chance to take a look at this, but 124 House Republicans co-authored a letter to Merrick Garland, who is the Attorney General of the United States, a more undeserving man I can't think of. But 124 House Republicans co-authored this letter calling on Merrick Garland to investigate attacks on pro-life organizations as domestic terrorism. I want to read to you just this one portion of the letter. It says, "We write to express serious concerns over recent attacks targeting religious organizations in crisis pregnancy centers and request the Department of Justice respond with how its National Security Division plans to investigate these attacks as domestic terrorism. Since the draft Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health U.S. Supreme Court opinion was leaked on May 2nd, U.S. Supreme Court justices and pro-life advocates have experienced heightened threats and violence." To my knowledge, Merrick Garland has not responded to this letter. There have been no statements from the Democrats in regards to this letter. And when the House actually finally voted on increasing security measures for the Supreme Court justices, even Nancy Pelosi just kind of walked by, and she really didn't want to talk about it. It's almost like they know something.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably two categories of people there, right? There's those who do actually know something and who have on some level participated, whether it be through private conversations or other means of support. And then there are those who might not know something, but are genuinely pleased to hear that this stuff is happening, right? I mean, the reality is they are enemies of the good, and they take pleasure in every act of violence. And they might give lip service to the fact that, well, this is a democracy and we don't behave that way, and that's not how our system works. But deep down, they're glad for it. They've fought their whole lives. Their entire persona is wrapped up in these fights that they've been fighting for so long. And so I have a hard time imagining that the majority of them are not taking pleasure in all of this.
Sure. I'm a bit more conspiratorial in my mindset, having studied communists and their tactics and everything else for so long.
Well, Saul Alinsky, if you look at Saul Alinsky, there's almost no chance that a very large number of Democrats are not participating in this on some level. You said, whether that be private conversations, whether that be through material means of some sort, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's exactly where I was going with this. Saul Alinsky, but even if you look at the way the early Soviet Union operated and the way that they would enact terrorist measures on the populace in order to scare them into allowing the government to take control and allowing the police to secure them, the Nazis did the same thing. And I know once you invoke the Nazis, you've lost the argument, right? Except that the fact of the matter is the Nazis really did things, and the Nazis actually existed, and their tactics actually worked for what they were trying to accomplish.
Yep.
In the same respect, if we want to understand how things are going to happen in society, we have to look at those examples. And I think knowing what happened with the Reichstag fire and how they blamed some young guy who was actually mentally retarded, called him an avowed communist, and then said that it was the communists that were trying to take over everything. And then they increased their police presence. They increased their police measures. They used terrorism in order to then put into place the measures that they want to enact.
Yeah.
So I can't help but wonder how much of a connection there is between, say, Nancy Pelosi and some of these groups like Black Lives Matter, or how much of a
Yeah.
connection there is between, I don't know, Chuck Schumer and some of the other more militant organizations. I mean, these are the same people that were cheering them on as they were burning the country 2 years ago.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. I mean, they know that violence is a useful tool. They're when they act as though that's not the case, when they act as though that's unfathomable to them, it's just a show. It's just a facade they put on. But for those people, and this is true for, I think, both parties. Political theater is the main staple right now of our politics. Right, everything is political theater. Everything is about the larger media presence and how it can be utilized. And so looking at everything through that lens, right? I was a storyteller most of my life. I was a story engineer. I owned a development company, sold shows to Netflix and everything else. And what you see before you in the media, when it comes to politics, what you see is micro stories being intentionally built, engineered, and presented. And it takes a massive army to tell a good story, to tell a useful story. It takes an army of people. So it's to me, it's impossible to imagine that there aren't large amounts of politicians working together to craft this narrative precisely as they need for it to be utilized to their ends.
I want to read here just it's a little long, but it's not too long. Marco Rubio demanded answers from the Department of Justice on danger to Supreme Court justices, violence against pro-life organizations, and so forth. He said, I conveniently received a response to my letter from Department of Justice on the same day that an attempted assassination of Justice Kavanaugh was made on June 8th, 2022, Rubio wrote. Violent acts like this should come as no surprise, given the threats made outside of justices' homes were precisely the cause for alarm that we referenced in asking the Department of Justice to hold these bad actors accountable. The full text of the letter is below. And what he said is, I write to follow up on my original letter dated May 11th in 2022. This is Rubio to Attorney Garland. In that letter, I asked the Department of Justice to publicly condemn and investigate the ongoing and unlawful efforts designed to intimidate Supreme Court justices, including by protesters who made threats outside their homes following the leak. I conveniently received a response, and I read that part. According to the federal complaint, a man carrying a Glock 17, tactical knife, zip ties, and other burglary tools was arrested while approaching Brett Kavanaugh's home. He told officers he was angry and wanted to kill Justice Kavanaugh because the court may overturn Roe v. Wade. Violent acts like this should come as no surprise, given that the threats made outside of justices' homes were precisely the cause for alarm that we referenced in asking the Department of Justice to hold these bad actors accountable. In the Senate, we responded to those threats by passing the Supreme Court Policy Parity Act, which would enhance federal protection for the justices and their families. As you are no doubt aware, this bipartisan legislation has been stonewalled by House Democrats who continue to block its passage. They finally passed it. This was from before that June 8th. So this is before it got passed. Even in light of those disturbing facts on June 9th, Speaker Pelosi went so far as asserting no one is in danger. This kind of partisan politicking by House leadership has hamstrung critical judicial security measures and made the Department of Justice's responsibility for enforcing federal law even greater. The Department of Justice can no longer afford to remain on the sidelines. We must commit to an investigation. Here's one thing that comes to mind is, what happens if one of the Supreme Court justices actually gets assassinated because they continue to delay? They continue to refuse to put in measures that are going to protect the justices. They allow, illegally, it's a federal crime, but they're allowing these protests to go on outside their homes. They're not investigating the people that are actually doxing the Supreme Court justices and publishing their home addresses. So it seems that we actually have a war of the Democrat Party on the Supreme Court itself,
Hmm.
one of the third branch of the United States federal government. Is that not the very definition of sedition?
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. I've been saying for a while now that when historians, I try to look at things from a historical perspective. Right? I'm a big fan of history. When historians look back on this time, uh, they will absolutely consider this the Cold War of whatever civil war is coming in this country.
I
Right?
agree.
This time frame will be included as the buildup, right? Just as in our last Civil War, there was a very long buildup with chess pieces being played on both sides. Just like with both world wars, the historians can look back now and look at the very obvious antagonizing behavior that was taking place on all sides intentionally to get somebody to do something that would then allow the other party to to step in and make a certain maneuver. This is the lead up to war, and we're in the thick of it. We are a country truly divided in a way that we haven't been since the last Civil War.
It's very interesting you bring up the Civil War angle because my wife and I were talking about this just the other night. And what she was bringing up to me was the idea or the fact that Biden is now talking about putting in an executive order that
Right.
will require states to include LGBT indoctrination in the schools and the libraries and basically any institution that receives federal funds. And if those states do not take those measures, do not implement those programs and policies, then federal funds will be withheld.
Right.
And my response to her was, well, at that point, I really think that Governor DeSantis and Governor Greg Abbott and any of the other really solid, very truly conservative governors out there needs to turn to the federal government and say, fine, go pound sand. We're not going to take your money, but neither are we going to send federal funds to you. We're no
Right.
longer going to pay federal taxes if you're going to withhold funds for this kind of political rhetoric.
So you're absolutely right. And the problem is that's the exact story of the first Civil War.
I know. My wife
That's
brought that up.
It's the exact story. And people sometimes get this could be an unpopular opinion, I suppose, occasionally. But the Civil War was essentially one side saying we no longer want to participate. We no longer believe in the direction that that your government has taken us in, and we would like to bow out.
Yep.
We don't want anything from you, but we also aren't giving you anything anymore. We're done. And the other side said that's unacceptable, and they invaded. I mean, that was
Right.
that is the historical facts of the war, regardless of what how you look at any of the other details.
Right.
That was the historical facts, and that's precisely what we're right on the precipice of now. And it'll be an interesting thing to watch unfold.
I
And
think
there's
it'll
always
be
time to correct. There is always time to correct. The closer you get, the longer you delay, the more violent the correction ends up being, right?
perhaps. My wife brought that up too, and I said I think that it's a little bit different this time around, just because we still have a memory of the pain of the Civil War.
Mm,
Ken Burns' Civil War series is still seared in my mind.
right.
I still hear, da 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 da, as he's reading letters from soldiers who were upset about the fact that they were fighting people they knew,
Oh yeah.
and
Well,
the horror of it.
none of us want to see that, right?
Right.
There are calls for peaceful divorce, if you will, on both sides.
Hmm.
Uh, the problem is it is never the people that start war, right?
Yeah, this is
And
true.
that's true. I mean, we like to think of the Revolutionary War as a people's war, but it wasn't. It was a small
Hmm.
group of elites who, saw an opportunity and chose to move forward with a course of action.
Hmm.
Uh, and it wasn't the people's war. The Civil War wasn't the People's War. It was again a small group of elites. If you look at the elites in our country now, I don't see any likelihood that memory of the Civil War is still seared into their memory, so to speak. They live in a bubble, right? Once the elites live in a bubble, once they live outside of the scope of reality, and they have a general disdain for the public, even the public that supports them, right? So the left, the elites in the left have a general disdain for the leftist public.
Right.
They don't like the average person, and they believe that the average person needs a strong-handed government to tell them how to live their lives.
Here's the interesting thing. Starting in 2020, they began pulling down statues of Civil War figures. They also started pulling down statues of Saint Junipero Serra and a few others, but really they were focused on pulling down statues that were directly related to the Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that interesting. And then they started pulling down the founding fathers, just because they owned slaves at some point, so therefore they have to go too. So they're trying to erase history.
Yeah.
And in trying to erase history, what are they trying to do? They're trying to erase our memory of the pain of Civil War that we once endured, which will then allow or open up the possibility for a new war that doesn't necessarily have any kind of context for the younger crowd coming up through the ranks. However, I think that I still think this time around it's going to be different. And the reason I say that is that the federal military, the Army, the Marines especially, I doubt the Marines would go along with this. I don't think the Marines would actually go along with any kind of civil conflict. And a lot of the recruits come out of Texas.
Yeah,
a whole lot of them.
For that's been the standard for the majority of the military's history. But you have to ask yourself, why has the various branches of the military, why have they been radically going woke lately, right? And that's a top-down decision. That's not the average person in the military saying we need more of this.
But they're weeding them out. Yeah,
they're weeding them out. The reality is, I know a lot of young men at my parish, young men around this middle American county that I live in, who are passionate about our country. They're passionate. These are the men that would have jumped at the opportunity to sign up for some branch of the military, right? 15 years ago, these are all the guys that would have absolutely, right out of high school, been in there. They would have been ROTC, the whole thing. And now they're repulsed by it. They don't want anything to do with the mandatory, medical procedure. Mm-hmm. They don't want anything to do with I grew up with two moms, and I know what real adversity is because I protested in San Francisco. All of that stuff that's coming out of the military now, these young men are running as far away from as they can. Yep. And so maybe right now this tipping point is still on our side, but that won't be for very long.
Right.
They only need to push that a little harder, and you'll find that most of the people in the military are young socialists who are radically woke, mm-hmm. and who are only there for a paycheck, and who have no passion for this country or for its people or for the foundations, the value system that built the country, right? They will essentially be, the brown shirts. They'll essentially be the operating wing of the leftist party.
And let's not forget that Biden was the one that threatened to nuke various portions of the United States. So there's that too.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think I'm a little bit more optimistic, especially right now. I think that if say Governor Greg Abbott or Governor DeSantis were to move now, and as you pointed out, I think the advantage is currently on our side. Yeah. If they were to move now and say, all right, you want to go ahead and put in this particular executive order and force us to take your LGBT ideologies within our schools and everything else, we're out. Yeah. We're out. We're just done.
Delayed conflict is the greater conflict. And that's, from a historical standpoint, that's always the case. Now, people are taught that we should be avoiding conflict, and that is fundamentally wrong.
I
We should
agree.
be engaging in conflict as readily as we can, with charity in our hearts, but with duty in our hearts as well. Because the faster we deal with this problem, the lesser the violence is. And being a big fan of history, someone who almost exclusively studies history in their spare time, it's kind of a Cassandra complex, in the sense of it's so painfully obvious, the natural course of events, unless grace acts upon it to counter it. The course of events is pretty much fixed in stone, and um, the horror of war in general, but particularly of civil war, the horror is unimaginable. Studying history is almost exclusively the study of the horrors of war, right?
Yeah.
And it's not a fun thing to think about. But I think being vocal, and that's one of the reasons why way back now, a year and a half or so ago, I decided to start just being kind of radically vocal about these things, because I do believe that being vocal, talking about it publicly, talking about it with anyone that's willing to listen, can play some small part in countering it, right? In countering that inevitability.
Lisa Evers has a comment for you. She says, I agree, Bug. I'm so happy that I retired 10 years ago. I did not recognize the military, now even the USCG. And then my mother has a statement for you. She says, Bug, you just nailed it. I discouraged any of our children from joining the service in the 90s, even though both my husband and I had Navy careers. And that's true. I can tell you that I thought for maybe 10 minutes about joining the Navy, and there were two things that immediately popped into my head. And the first was, I will never serve under Bill Clinton. And the second was, how could I possibly, as somebody who wants to have a family, how could I ever join a service or go into the military knowing that I would be away from my family the majority of the time? And I couldn't do that.
Right.
So,
It's an unfortunate situation that we're in, right? Because like I said, the more they stoke those woke fires, the more they're weeding out, and they're penalizing. I mean, I grew up in a military family. All of my family are military men. They're men of great honor and virtue and courage. My stepfather, who raised me, is hands down the greatest man I know. He is a champion of a man, and he has been tormented. He has been absolutely tormented in the last few years for just being a man of somewhat traditional values who holds himself upright and does the right thing. And he has been punished repeatedly. I don't see it. I don't see it being a neutral good of the country anymore. I see it slowly slipping towards being a party, a single party tool, a single party hammer, if you will.
it definitely seems as though lines are being drawn. It makes me think that, our Lord said, on the right I shall place my sheep, and on my left I shall place the goats, and then the goats will be cast in everlasting fire. The situation, just in the federal government and the way things are going. I mentioned the executive order. I don't know if you saw the picture of Rachel Levine, the director of Health and Human Services, the 4-star admiral, which is an absolute joke. And I put Rachel in air quotes too, but there was a picture of that individual with the new White House spokesman, and they're holding this rainbow LGBT Black Lives Matter flag.
Yeah.
And I posted that on social media, and I said, well, it looks like we've exchanged smart bombs for glitter bombs. I'm sure our enemies are quaking where they stand. We're an absolute joke.
Yeah.
Our entire country is an absolute joke to the rest of the world, and they know it.
Yeah. Well, that's the that's the great irony of this push, is it serves no utility purpose. And let's face it, the military is a form of utility, right?
Yeah.
That it has a purpose. Its purpose is the defense of our national borders.
Hmm.
That's it. That's its purpose. And so, uh, enforcing all of these wild ideologies that have nothing to do with the defense of our national borders is it's a strange decision, because I'll tell you, there's a lot of people in the world, there's a lot of nations in the world who would love to see the collapse of our borders. They would
Right.
love to do us harm. That's been the case forever, and
Hmm.
it'll always be the case. Every nation is going to have enemies. Chesterton so beautifully said that the patriotism in my heart is a virtue, and the patriotism in my enemy's heart is also a virtue. Nations will always have enemies. Nations will always be at odds with each other for various reasons, and to pretend that's not the case, to pretend that we can turn our military into a I don't know what, a drag show. I don't know what it is anymore, but to turn it into that, I'll tell you, there's a guy in Russia right now who's sitting back, smoking a cigar and laughing. Uh,
Hmm.
there's a guy in China right now that's doing the same.
Yep. They understand that the purpose of military is to kill people and break things.
Yep.
Um, that doesn't seem our military seems to think it's all about dancing and glitter. But so the Biden's new executive order, and I mentioned it earlier, it does several things. One, it directs the HHS to release new guidance for states on how to expand access to comprehensive care for LGBTQ patients. You know, here's the funny thing. They always talk about comprehensive care for alphabet soup patients,
Mm-hmm.
but they never really define what that means.
Right.
As far as I can tell, human physiology has never changed, despite the fact that some people happen to be mentally ill and think that parts aren't parts, or that genes aren't genes. And the idea of comprehensive care for these kinds of people, where, well, I'm sorry, if somebody comes in and they're biologically male and they say that they're suffering a particular problem or ailment, well, you treat them that way.
Right.
You're not going to treat a former man for cervical cancer,
Yeah.
because even if they have the surgery that cuts things off, uh, they're still not going to be able to contract cervical cancer because they don't have the parts to do it with.
Right.
So this idea of comprehensive care makes no sense to me. What do you think this is all about?
Um, I think it's a shell game. I
Hmm.
think it doesn't actually have anything to do with any LGBTQRS adults. I
Hmm.
think this is about children.
Yep.
I think that this entire executive order that he's trying to ram through, I think it's entirely about forcing uh, people to uh, forcing people to let their children be harmed, right, in various ways, whether that be puberty blockers, whether that be through the psychological needs that they have, to have this promoted or that's promoted, or to convince them that they're this, that, or the other at young ages. That's the whole purpose of it. Because the reality is, as adults, these adults can do whatever they want.
Right.
They don't need any help from the federal government. They know that. They also know that they don't gain anything by ramming this through. What they gain, though, is the power. I won't say authority, because at this point there's no jurisdiction, of course.
Right.
So they don't have the authority, but they do have the power to start dragging kids out of parents' homes, parents who they do not agree with, parents who they see as enemies of the ideological state that they're trying to form.
So the minute 5-year-old Johnny says that his name is Susie, and somebody overhears that, then the LGBTQ treatment within the clinic now becomes hormone therapy, hormone blockers,
And it's
and
medically necessary once you define it that way, right? And if you, as a parent, refuse to give your child a medically necessary treatment, you are a child abuser. The child has to be removed from your care.
yep.
So that's that. what I've learned is that if you look at how they want to harm children, you can almost always find the motive in there somewhere.
It's almost like they're trying to transform this country into Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah, well, not almost. I mean, that's they're. I'll tell you, they're. If they had explicitly stated that they were intentionally trying to do that, I'd believe them 100% because they're doing a good job of it.
Yeah, no kidding. That, of course, makes sense when we start to look at how the executive order also orders the education department to release a sample school policy that is inclusive of LGBT nonsense. And then also calls for conversion therapy. He calls conversion therapy inhumane and demands that federal funding programs not provided. So now, not only is it all about trying to make sure that children are being transitioned and indoctrinated and groomed, but it also takes the opposite side and says that those who think that they probably made a mistake and shouldn't be going through these kinds of treatments, now any attempt to pull them out of it is deemed unhealthy or bad or immoral or whatever else they want to call it.
Right. That's exactly right. Yeah, it's again, it's a big shell game. There are plenty of bad actors in the government who simply see it as an opportunity to create laws which will give them power over their enemies, right? And then there are people who have truly sort of taken the bait ideologically. They are of that category. They are of that class of people, so to speak. And ultimately, it's narcissism, right? They need to be affirmed, and they need to procreate. They cannot procreate in the standard manner. And so, what can they do? This is just like with leftists and everyone else. What do? They go after your kids.
Yep.
Right? They go after your kids because they aren't reproducing in any other way. Most leftists are not reproducing at a sustainable rate. Whereas most of us traditionalists or conservatives or whatever you want to call us, we tend to have lots of children.
Well, and it's very interesting as a storyteller, as a former movie actor and producer, very well that, of course, as you mentioned, within the traditional Catholic family, children are produced out of an act of love. But in monster movies like vampires or like zombies and vampires and werewolves are produced out of an act of violence.
That's right.
And in order to make a vampire, you have to bite the person. In order to make a zombie, you have to bite the person. In order to make another werewolf, you have to bite the person. Yep. It all has to do with this bite. And it's kind of an interesting idea. And as a storyteller, what comes to your mind when you think about that?
Well, I think you're hitting the nail as squarely on the head as possible here. There's a great book called Monsters from the Id, which sort of discusses this same idea, is that the more depraved a culture gets, the more its stories start to become grotesque. And part of that is the broken psychology of the person is almost telling on itself, right? And so you see a lot of these stories. I mean, zombie movies, when they really had their resurrection, so to speak, when they really came back full force, because they originally started way back in the 20s, but when they really came back, it was during the Cold War, right? And it was the idea that truthful ideology that is true and good and just, right? It has a way of just sort of spreading on its own. It has a way of reproducing, if you will, through love, right? And evil ideology does not. Evil ideology spreads by force. So all of these monster stories, they have an aspect of truth in them. I think listening to what the ideologues are trying to tell us in their broken, sort of guilt-ridden way, it's a helpful thing to do.
One last thing I want to cover before we go for this evening. It's very interesting and very alarming as we look at the global situation. And, as we know, there are all kinds of problems in the Vatican. We know that there are all sorts of issues with who's going to have access to the Mass and that kind of thing. But right now, I think the most immediate pressing issue that we're facing is that we just had the most dramatic interest rate hike in the last 28 years. In addition to that, gas prices are approaching, they're going up at a rate of almost 50 cents every 2 weeks. And if that continues and sustains into the summer and throughout the summer, what we're going to wind up with are gas prices that are so high that truckers won't even be able to afford just transporting goods. I actually heard the number thrown around that $7 per gallon in diesel is kind of the breaking point. Once we get beyond $7 a gallon in diesel, it's no longer economically viable for a single truck to transport goods from one point to another, because now it's more expensive for them to be on the road and they won't make any money.
Right. Well, we're already seeing that, right? We're seeing that on a smaller scale. I had a major catastrophe at my house 2 days before Christmas. Big flooding. I've been slowly trying to renovate, trying to rip out and clean mold and put in a new water tank and things I've had to do. So I've had to order a couple costly things, and it's been very hard for us, especially right after choosing a life of poverty. But we've managed. We ordered one expensive item that was necessary for our home at the cost that it was on the website. And they said, well, because of manufacturing and distribution issues, it's going to be 6 months before it can come in. Okay, well, if that's the only option, it's the only option. I didn't have another option. 6 months later, they say, sorry to tell you this, but it's going to be another 6 months before that can come in. Going, man, this doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, because in any event, building the thing and shipping it to me can't take a year. So I had to cancel and find another option. Within 2 or 3 weeks of canceling, I was looking at prices and trying to figure out what to do. This particular item, all of the prices had gone up by about 40%.
Wow.
Now, here's the key. They had this item in stock. I don't know this for certain, but my guess is they had these things somewhere. But the cost of manufacturing and shipping was so expensive that it was no longer cost effective. And so what do? They sit on it and they say, we don't have the item. We don't have the item. We don't have the item, hoping that costs are going to change, that gas prices come down, and then they can start making money again. And when they realize that's not the case, they go, well, let's hope as many people cancel their orders as possible so that we aren't morally or legally obligated to fulfill these orders at a loss, right? Knowing that if they say it's going to take a year for your item to come in, what happens? You cancel your order. Now that they jack the prices up so that the new orders are now cost effective for them. And you're going to start seeing this blanket across the board. This is going to be for everything. Prices are just going to skyrocket. And if you've been waiting for an item, I guarantee you they're going to keep pushing it, because they don't want to send you your item at the loss of cost that you ordered it at.
Well, that actually that brings up a very terrifying thought with regard to what we're going to see on the shelves in the coming weeks and months.
Yep.
Currently, we've already seen shortages on the shelves, and it's always varying as to what it is. Sometimes it's toilet paper, sometimes it's detergent.
Right.
Other times it's onions.
Baby,
whatever it is.
Whatever it is, yeah.
Yeah, whatever it is, it's just there's this almost like a rolling brownout of varying items that go on the shelves. The cost of items is going up steadily, but if we prognosticate the fact that we have now printed $3 trillion in the last year,
right?
$3 trillion. Just to put that into perspective, it took 5 years for the federal government to inject $1 trillion into the federal government. And we've now injected 3 times that in 1 year.
Yep.
This is the recipe for hyperinflation.
Yep.
Which means that we can see right on the horizon, there is a tsunami of price hikes that are going to just crash into us at the speed of sound, but we can see it coming.
Well, so it's an act of theft.
It is active theft. That's it.
It's an act of theft. Ultimately, inflation is caused by one thing. No matter how fancy of a dance work they want to do, economics is a small passion of mine. Inflation is caused by government spending.
Yep.
Inflation is caused by government printing money to spend money. That's it. Nothing else causes inflation. The government prints more money, the value of money goes down, the cost of items go up. It's child's play as far as the how it functions. And they want to play all these games and do this dance. The reality is it's theft. Inflation is a secret tax. It's a way of taxing the future, right? Future people. It's a way of stealing your savings. Your savings might have the same number on the account as far as what's in the account, but the value of that number means a completely different thing. They've gone into your bank account and stolen money out of it.
So now we've gotten to a point where we need to start evaluating exactly what it is that we can buy, keep on our own store shelves in house, in your homes, in anticipation of these price hikes going up. Start buying canned goods, start buying toilet paper and underwear, toothpaste, the kinds of things that you normally wouldn't think of stocking up on. I think it's time for us to start really thinking about stocking up.
That's all well and good and true. More and more I'm realizing as I've started this sort of homesteading monastery idea, I knew nothing going into it. I knew absolutely nothing about animal husbandry or any of that stuff, and how wildly easy it is if you're willing to persevere through a few learning curves, right? Persevere through a few mistakes and chase goats for 5 hours. And then realize I'm never going to make that mistake again. Next time I'm going to make sure the fence is, put up before I do this or that or the other. A couple little learning curve mistakes, but once you get through those, the stability of having your own food, the stability, and let me tell you, everybody can keep chickens.
Oh yeah.
Right? There is nobody on the planet that cannot keep 5 to 10 chickens, and you don't even have to feed them. You can literally free range chickens and they will eat all the bugs in your yard. They will pick at the grass, and you have to give them almost nothing to sustain them. Make sure they have some water. That is meat. That is eggs. That is a source of food when things go wrong, right? Yeah. Goats, you've got cheese and milk and meat if need be, right? And goats, if you have now obviously not everyone can keep goats because you have to have at least an acre or two, right? Half an acre, I suppose you could probably keep a few, but the reality is there are lots of people that could be utilizing their land in a minimal way to keep animals.
Right.
And we tend to look at even large plots of land, half acre, 2 acres. We tend to think of them as lawns.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Think of them as lawns, and we get on our riding mower and we mow 2 acres, the 2 acres in front of our house, so that when people look, it's this pristine view. Throw some fences up, put some chickens in there, get a goat or two. And I'll tell you what, the ease of mind will start to set in when you realize, in the worst case scenario, I've got a year worth of food right here in my front yard.
Right. Yeah. We haven't had a problem with ticks ever since we got chickens.
Same here. Same here. When we first moved into our property, it was completely infested by carpenter ants and ticks.
Oh boy.
Covered in ticks every day. We had trees falling over from being hollowed out by carpenter ants. We have 80 chickens right now.
80? No kidding.
80 they free reign. They run the yard. They run into the woods. We do nothing for them. And at night, they come back to the coop and they go to bed. And we have no ticks. I haven't seen a tick in months, year. We have no carpenter ants. All of our trees are thriving again and healthy. We haven't seen any carpenter ants in the house. So we're supposed, our land, we're supposed to care for it, right?
Yeah.
God gives it to us so that we tend to it. That's the beauty of subsidiarity. The land will kind of tell you what it needs, and then it's your job to provide that, right? It's your job to tend to it. And these big lawns are essentially deserts. People don't realize it. They're deserts, and they die slowly. They get
that's kind of an interesting thought, that these big lawns are a monument to man's sterility.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, the reality is these things are dead, dying things, right? People are constantly fighting pests and putting all these poisons in to try and fight the natural process that's taking place. And the land is telling you, it's telling you what to do, right? It's telling you how to solve these problems. You got pest problems. throw some chickens on it, right?
Right.
Or rabbits can do a wonderful thing to care for your land and to help rejuvenate things. There's all kinds of ways you can take care of what you have and provide for yourself in a way that gives you a sense of stability.
I think we need to talk some more about how to do that, because I've thought about getting rabbits. I know that rabbits are a good source of meat and they kind of taste like chicken,
Mm-hmm.
but gosh, they're so cute. And
hey, let me tell you what, I just slaughtered and butchered my second cow, right?
uh-huh. You did it yourself?
I did it myself. Both. I did it myself. Now, again, 1 year ago, a year and a couple months ago, I had no experience with farming whatsoever. I had never seen a cow killed. I had never seen an animal butchered. And my priest came over for the second cow. My parish priest was like, I want to come take some notes, Bug. I want to come see this. Another friend of mine was in town, and here I am out there skinning this thing and turning it into meat, right?
Uh-huh.
God turns it into meat. He made the miracle of these machines that turn grass into meat. And then I just have to strip all the extra stuff off and put the meat in the freezer. But I'll tell you what, the first time I did it, I was terrified.
Oh, sure.
Absolutely terrified. I was terrified that I was going to do it wrong or that I was going to make mistakes. I was also terrified because, I grew close to these animals.
Sure.
I treat my animals really well. I treat them. I want to elevate their natural existence. That's my job. I don't want to ever grow the mentality of sort of being a mass production factory, right? Like I'm not an animal factory. I'm a farmer. I love my animals. But you know what's interesting is putting that cow down. It wasn't bothersome.
Mm-hmm.
That cow was. It just makes perfect sense. Like
Sure.
if you're a Catholic man, you'll worry about it until the moment comes. And then the second the moment comes, it just clicks and you go, this is the process. This is the reality of this animal's existence.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it gives glory to God.
Yeah. And it's feeding my kids.
That's exactly right.
Fulton Sheen had a very brilliant analogy where he said that when an animal eats, we all eat things of a lower nature. So, you've got the cow that eats the grass. And when the cow eats the grass, he says to the grass, I'm going to elevate your nature by allowing you to become part of me.
Yep.
And so then when we eat the cow, we then elevate the nature of the cow and we allow the cow in a way to become part of us.
Right.
But then God reverses that by becoming food for us, whereby he elevates our nature through Holy Communion by allowing us to consume his flesh and blood. And it's a beautiful thought that it's God reversing that order and saying, no, I'm going to come down and humble myself to become your food. It's beautiful.
Man, that is absolutely beautiful. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thought, especially right around Corpus Christi. And it's so true. I mean, it's unfathomable. It's unfathomable how God loves us.
Yeah.
We can't fathom it, and we will for all eternity. I sometimes meditate on the beatific vision, the idea that for all eternity.
I'm glad you can do that. I haven't been able to yet.
Oh, well, no. The idea that for all eternity, you can pick one little thing. You can just pick God's love for us. And you will never run out of learning new things about it for all eternity. Every single moment of eternity is a new aha realization, right?
Right.
God's love for us is an endless well that we can't fathom. I'm going to have to look that Fulton Sheen quote up because that's a beautiful thought.
Yeah, I have a CD of about 140 different Fulton Sheen talks, and I can't even begin to tell you which one that one was.
I'll find it.
Yeah, but it was wonderful. It's always stuck with me. But well, that's going to wrap it up for tonight. We are out of time. But Bug, I want to thank you so much for coming back on the program. I always enjoy having these conversations with you. You bring such a great insight to things. And we are definitely going to have to follow up and talk some more about, subsidiarity in farming, and I think that really this is where we're going, and I think that we need to start really considering how we are going to take care of our families in the coming crisis, because the kind of knowledge that you bring to the table is going to help sustain a lot of people, I think.
You know, it's interesting because this is kind of in a way the chastisement we need. We have gotten away from our nature.
Yeah.
We have grown so far away from our own food production and
Yeah.
our basic needs. We're so separated from them. God is in a way kind of forcing us, right? He's kind of putting us in a situation where we go, well, now we have to do this. And here's the thing: I did it out of necessity. I did it because the idea of poverty and the idea of sort of building a home monastery and finding this sort of hybrid concept, having a homestead where you raise your own food is actually just necessary. I had no way out of it. And then all of a sudden, when you really start to learn about it as a Catholic man, we want to understand what we're doing, right? We analyze everything.
Yeah.
And the passion that comes when you start to realize how things function, how cool soil is, right? I mean, it's just wild. And I had no passion for any of it. And now it's all I ever think about. I dream about it.
No kidding.
I dream about farming now, and I love it.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's wonderful. Well, happy Father's Day to you. I hope you and your kids and your wife are going to be doing something special.
I didn't realize it was Father's Day. Thank you for reminding me.
It's coming up this Sunday.
Okay. I had no idea, but I'm glad you said that because I got to call my stepdad.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. All right. Well, God bless you, Bug. Thank you for being on the program. God bless all the rest of you. I don't know yet what my availability is going to be next week because I'm going out to Beloit, Wisconsin, as I mentioned. I'll keep you posted, but I might be able to get another program in before I have to do my thing on Friday. So hopefully we can do this still, but I'll keep you posted. In the meantime, why don't we close with our prayer? In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum. Benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus.
Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen.
Our Lady of Victory.
Ora pro nobis.
In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Thanks so much, Bug. We'll talk to you next time. God bless you.
You too, sir.